What's going on, y'all? KM Best here to cover all of your hot takes. Now, since we've last done one of these videos, so much has happened, from balance changes to very hated cards, to no balance changes to some other hated cards, and even some nerfed bundles, so there's some monetization controversy to cover. Let's jump into your hot takes. Datamines are the real villain of Marvel Snap and not Second Dinner. It's because of Datamines that people get their expectations for bundles and cards and can't comprehend when Second Dinner makes a change to a bundle when it's released. The community loses their shit. Secondarily, there's another hot take here that ties into this one but provides the opposite perspective. Second Dinner treats us like children by not letting us budget appropriately for bundles. And I think the two of these takes taken together really get to the core of why this bundle nerf monetization has been a controversy. So, for those who are unaware, what most of this is referring to is there was a Datamines bundle for Sugar and Spice, which is the bundle with Destroyer and Sentry in it, that had a lot more tokens and a lot of credits in it. When people data mined it, they looked at it and they were like, okay, this is like the best bundle they're ever going to release. And because it was Christmas, everyone just assumed that, okay, that was intentional and therefore it was going to stay that way. Now, as far as I've been able to gather from conversations with the devs in public-facing Discord servers, the guy in charge of monetization is the dev called Tucker, and he said that basically what happened with that bundle was he put in the numbers wrong and didn't do the math correctly. So what that means is it had very high credits and very high tokens, and it was only ever supposed to have one of those. And I think that in a case like that, where people are making reviews of these bundles and basing them off data mines and saying that this is like a thing you should do, content creators should be responsible when they're doing content based on data mines and say, hey, this is data mined. You don't necessarily have a guarantee that it will come out this way. I do think that that is an important thing for content creators to do. But by the same token, I also think that because it is being presented in a video as such, the disclaimer on it almost doesn't actually do anything to alleviate it. Because what else are you going to do? Are you just going to assume the best thing is always going to get nerfed every time? I don't exactly know. So to what the first person here said about Datamines being the real villain, I don't think Datamines are the real villain. They're the first order culprit of why this stuff happens, why people get their expectations up and then are disappointed when those expectations are brought down to regular levels. But I do think that what the Datamines are doing is filling a void. And that void is created by a lack of ability to plan. And that lack of ability to plan, to take a monthly budget for Marvel Snap and say, here's where I'm going to put it so that I can get the most value out of my $50 or whatever, which I think is a thing you should be able to do. That lack of ability to plan is because these bundles are not being disclosed in any real way. One thing I would look for a solution to this is some official communication of what the bundles are going to be, probably month to month. Every month they could just say, hey, these are the bundles that are coming out. And they tried that one time and there was a little bit of a mix up with a couple of the bundles such that they ended up having to do compensation. But I feel like that's actually just like a skill issue. Just communicate what the actual things in the bundles are going to be. I feel like that should be totally doable. Now, I brought this up and other people have brought this up, and I believe there was a dev answer that said basically that they don't plan on doing that. And I do think that that is an issue. So that is an issue because when you really zoom in on it, what I think maybe the black pill take on this is the best possible thing for Second Dinner is that none of us are able to plan. Because if none of us are able to plan, all we can do is look at the product in front of us and then choose whether or not to consume it. And so what'll happen is people will set like a threshold of this is the ratio at which I buy a bundle, and then you get converted into a more regular consumer where previously you were attempting to just spend your, I don't know, $50 a month, which seems like a lot to me, on a video game repeatedly. And I think that the issues that this creates are what the second tweet that I'm talking about in this section was talking about, which is they're treating us like children by not allowing us to budget. And I think it's a little different than that. I don't think they're treating us like children. I think it is probably optimal for their bottom line that people are unable to budget. So what I'm getting at here is this issue is very complicated. Data mines are currently filling a void that allow people to budget. Second Dinner is on some level perhaps incentivized to not allow people to do that. It is much more beneficial for their bottom line if you are just in a contextless void where you don't know whether it's a good deal or not. You just get to go based on your gut, because our guts are wrong a lot of the time. And I think that the ideal solution for me would be Second Dinner taking some ownership of this and saying, look, we don't need you to exist in a contextless void. We can still make money if you are not existing in a contextless void. And I think they probably can, which is why I think ultimately I'm fairly disappointed in the way they've chosen to handle this, which has been to say, we don't really expect to be doing month-to-month reveals of bundles, because I think that that seems like a very good compromise to me. If they just told us what bundles were coming each month, they would be able to, I think, find a strong balance between allowing people to plan ahead and not allowing them to plan ahead too far. And I'm, I guess, frustrated that they don't see the importance of providing that balance, because I do think it is important that your customers be allowed to make discerning purchases. And while I understand that it is likely more beneficial to the bottom line if we all exist in this unlimited void, I really hope that customer goodwill is worth at least some kind of compromise on this. Me personally, I have thought that the data mines were an issue in the sense of they are creating people's raised expectations, but they're only an issue because of this practice of wanting no context to exist for a bundle. And I think if that practice was even softened a little bit by just providing official bundle numbers the month they're going to come out, it would be wildly beneficial to the community at the very least. Feels like many players see snapping as a personal attack the way I get emote spammed if I snap and lose. This is true. Too many people think of snapping as like someone asserting dominance over you rather than someone raising in a poker game. And yeah, no, people are definitely taking it more as a personal attack. Like, oh, you thought you'd win? How dare you think you could beat me? Let me throw 7 Miss Marvel emotes at you. So like, yes, that is true. I do think that generally the understanding of snapping as a game mechanic rather than as a social function is not particularly well grasped by the community. But by the same token, that can be an advantage, right? Like if it is understood as a game mechanic and not a social function, you would not be able to do things like bluff snap, right? Like snapping represents something in the game, and that is both a mechanic and social. So yes, people probably take too much offense to it, but you should know that you can use that emotional impact of a snap in order to win games. Series drops are live ops PR rather than coherent curation of sets of cards with gradually escalating complexity and power. You can tell because plenty of build-arounds are still Series 5 rather than 3 where they belong. Wait, was this for unpopular opinions? One sec. So, yes, that is undeniably true. Series drops at this point have, as far as I can tell, no coherent identity. There is no difference between a Series 5 card, a Series 4 card, a Series 3 card based on escalating complexity. I don't even think that's obviously not an unpopular opinion. That is just a correct take. They only exist right now because of, I mean, saying they're only PR is one thing, I don't really know, but they only exist because they set the precedent for cards getting cheaper over time, and so they're making cards cheaper over time. Series drops especially are not related to complexity in any way. Big bads as a concept seem entirely outdated as well. So yes, this is not an unpopular opinion. It seems just correct to me. Series 3 drops shouldn't exist because they're actually bad for everyone. New players have more garbage blocking them for build-arounds. Older players develop the impression that if they wait long enough, the good stuff will be free, parentheses, it will never be free. I think this is an interesting take, not necessarily because it's incorrectly identifying a problem, because it is correctly identifying a problem, but I think perhaps the solution is one that is slightly less than optimal. I do think this correctly identifies that there is no rhyme or reason to the series. Series 2 is a little bit more complex than Series 1. That's good. Series 1 and 2 have like coherent identities, but 3, 4, and 5 are like fundamentally, mechanically, and in terms of being build-arounds, there's just not really a huge difference. Like, these are cards that have similar relative complexities. There is no justification other than the newer cards are the more expensive ones, and I do think that that is a correctly analyzed problem. And the second thing that this correctly analyzes is Series 3 should probably be split into two parts, because there are a lot of useless things in Series 3 right now that are blocking newer players from getting to exciting build-arounds. And what I mean by that is cards like Sarah, cards like Mr. Negative, cards like Wong are now, you're even less likely to get any one of them individually. And those are the kind of cards that someone coming out of Series 2 and entering Series 3 could really use as a build-around. And I think things like that should be focused on more. The bridge from Series 2 into Series 3 and the full game does almost make me want to suggest, and I think I've brought this idea up before, a like Series 2.5 where the build-arounds go. Now, granted, I do think there's some degree of aiming towards this with the free Series 3 that players get, but as Series 3 increases in size, that free Series 3 decreases in relative value. So maybe there could be something like, you know, people get more than one free Series 3. Like if it's your first time entering Series 3, maybe you get two. Maybe that works. I don't know. I just think that, like, generally speaking, an underserved part of this community is the people that are transitioning from Series 2 into Series 3 and what we would call the full game. There's no such thing as a bad card, just bad players. Nah, this is wrong. A lot of cards in this game, in fact, are designed to teach you that there are better versions of them. When you do the tutorial and you play Shocker, and then the game itself tells you, hey, replace that Shocker with Sentinel, because Sentinel is just Shocker but better. There are cards that are here to teach you that there are better versions of them. Now, does that mean like every card is unusable? No, I think Marvel Snap does a really good job at making most of their cards good, but there are definitely bad cards. And I think at this point, it's worth talking about, when I say bad, what do I mean? And when other people say bad, what do they mean? When I call a card bad, I usually mean there's better options. Are they strictly better options? Not always, but they're mostly better options, right? So when you talk about whether a card is good or bad, it is in the context of the other cards that exist. That is an important context to understand. If you are playing a Patriot deck, then yeah, Shocker is going to be better than Sentinel. And you would very reasonably say that Sentinel is bad in a Patriot deck because there's a better option. And so I think people seem to take offense when cards get called bad, because it's not like saying, oh, it's unusable, you can never win with this. Because even like the worst cards in the game still have like, 40% win rates, which means you're winning 4 out of 10 games with something that is bad. It's just the issue is that you can do better, right? And I think people get a little bit too emotionally invested in the concept of a card being good or bad as like an Aristotelian ideal. Like it's like a Platonic ideal. Like it's a very specific inherent quality of the card. And I don't think that's true. The cards are good or bad only in context. And context is what tells you whether there's better options. And if there's better things you could be doing, then yeah, a card can absolutely be bad. Losing to Alioth or Professor X is quite literally a skill issue in the majority of circumstances, and people need to stop complaining. I'm sympathetic to this because I think a lot of card game discourse is based around complaining, and it does bother me. Not that I'm immune to it, but I do wish that instead of complaining, people could, put their nose to the grindstone and work to figure out what it is about themselves. And like, yes, I think a lot of people lose to cards like Professor X and Alioth because they are not prepared for cards like Professor X and Alioth, and they could alleviate this if they wanted to. That said, I do think there is a very important question here, which is, why is this question assuming that those cards need to exist? Like, the question assumes the cards existing is sort of an inherent good, right? Like, the cards exist, and therefore that is the base standard of what should be true, and everyone else needs to get used to it because they're actually just bad if they don't think these cards are fun. And I think, you know, I do think I have an issue with people saying cards like Professor X are broken or incredibly strong, because I don't know if that was ever actually true. I think there were usually better things to be doing, but in certain situations, it was a very powerful thing to do. I think my major issue with the way this is phrased is that a card doesn't need to be broken to be an unpleasant game experience. And I think with Professor X, people are conflating claims that it is not fun with claims that it is broken. And I don't think that anyone is out here saying that Professor X is like one of the best cards in the game, because I don't think he ever was. But what they are saying is that he's like pound for pound one of the most annoying game experiences in the game. And that if that becomes a dominant meta deck, well, then a lot of the game becomes pretty annoying, doesn't it? And I think that's pretty valid, if you ask me. We should stop acting surprised and angry when Second Dinner nerfs expensive / season pass cards. We know they're willing to do that. We have to take it into account when purchasing. Yes, but also no. We should stop being surprised, but I don't think we should stop being upset necessarily. Like, there is a real conversation to be had about what it means to buy a card in Marvel Snap. And I'm actually surprised that conversation hasn't been a bigger one with the change to Werewolf by Night, because that card went from being an extremely powerful and extremely useful and extremely commonly played card that most people did not purchase because of like a flavor win or anything like that, or because Werewolf by Night is their favorite character. Most people bought Werewolf by Night because it would help them win games of Marvel Snap. And now it is much less a contributor to that at the current moment. I think that it is worth having a conversation about that, but I think ultimately this comes down to their release schedule, right? When all cards that are new are expensive, and they all are, there is no exception to that. The cheapest of them are $10 on the Battle Pass, and the most expensive of them are 6,000 tokens. They are all expensive, even though I will say the game does provide you ways to acquire them for free. They are a pretty large outlay of resources in terms of the game. They are a big commitment when you go and get one of these new cards. So one of the issues that creates is that when a designer wants to try something new or push the envelope or see how good something is going to be, and they're willing to miss high, it means that there is a constant cycle of cards releasing a little bit too strong and then getting brought back into line. And I think it wouldn't necessarily be an issue if this wasn't something I saw no way out of, right? Like, how do you get out of that cycle? How do you avoid this thing happening forever? And I honestly don't know, because at this point it does seem like it's going to happen forever. And I think people who are not, 100% familiar with the history of it, the first time it happens to you, you're pretty annoyed, and you have every right to be. And I think that is fine. I think it is fine. I don't want to sit here and police people's reactions to something like this, because just because we're used to it and jaded does not mean that the first time it happens to you, that you spend 6,000 tokens on Werewolf by Night and it gets changed to a 4/4 instead of a 3/3, and it drops in win rate by like 15%. Yeah, I feel like you have the right to be a little annoyed about that. And I actually think that for the most part, they've been good at not obliterating cards. This is what the big issue with the Mobius change was, oh my God, that guy doesn't even do what he said he did on the tin anymore. I think that Werewolf by Night is a nerf that they might have to walk back in the future, because he is quite weaker than he was. And I think another card that I'm really disappointed with how they handled was Elsa Bloodstone, who now no longer even does what she used to do at a worse rate. She just does something completely different that isn't very good. That one does make me a little bit upset. I don't exactly know where this goes in the future, but I do think that previous to this, they've shown a real dedication towards making sure cards remained playable after they changed them. And if you compare what happened to Werewolf by Night and Elsa Bloodstone to what happened to Zabu and Silver Surfer, I think it becomes clear that Wolf and Elsa got hit a little bit harder and with a little less care towards making them remain playable. And I don't know if that's necessarily just a function of how strong they were or what, but to me, that's how it feels. And I do hope they get back to that Zabu nerf methodology where, they made him weaker by making him no longer completely obscene, but he's still like a staple good card, and people who bought him can still feel good about that. And I really hope that that sort of mentality happens more, although I do understand it is very difficult to execute. Rigged RNG based on how much you spend. God, I wish this was true, but as anyone who has ever seen me play a single card into a danger room knows, it's not. Players keep complaining that the meta gets stale, but it's actually their collective problem of consistent net decking and less deck creation and experimentation. I don't like this take. I think that it puts the blame on players who are simply trying to win with as little effort as possible, which is the normal thing to do in a situation like this when you're not hyper invested. You go and you find someone who knows what they're doing and you do what they're doing. That's called learning. And I think that people treat this like the fact that net decking is a derisive word is just deeply disappointing to me, because it's like, well, look, if I want to go learn how to do something, what am I going to do? I'm going to go Google how to do that thing and figure out from someone who knows what they're doing how to do that thing. Like, or I'm going to go and take lessons in that thing from someone who knows what they're doing. Like, this is the basic mode of how to learn how to do anything in human society, is you go to someone who knows what they're doing and you're like, hey, how do I do that? And I think that, like, the idea that people are somehow at fault for doing that are ridiculous. I think that is a ridiculous assertion. Keep net decking. It's a good thing. Like, I don't even just say that because, like, that's what my channel is mostly. I say that because it's like the idea that card games have to be about self-expression instead of just playing the good things that you enjoy playing for fun. Like, not everyone wants to fully self-actualize through a card game. Some people just want to know what the best deck is so they can hit infinite while they're playing on the toilet 4 times a month. That's fine. People enjoy things in different ways. Now, as to the, I guess, second part of this, which is people complaining about the meta being stale, I think that that is more of an issue with just, that's how card games work. And people will want new stimuli over time, right? Like, we're searching for the dopamine. We get a little upset when we lose to the same thing over and over and over again. And, you can fix that, but I don't really view those as related problems. I think it is incumbent upon the developers of a game to make sure that a strategy is not overwhelmingly dominant. And whether or not you want to blame people copying others, or as I call it, learning, for why that strategy percolates through the metagame, I don't really think it's their fault for doing what the game itself, which is incentivized to make you want to win, is telling them to do. Like, when the game is built around being exciting when you win, I don't think you can get mad at people for being like, all right, well, how do I do that as much as possible? That seems a little counterproductive to me. All right, y'all. I hope you enjoyed this look at your hot takes. I had a ton of fun going through all of them. I realized, like, the first 8 minutes of this video are me talking about the same hot take, but it was an important one, so I'm glad we talked about it. And I'm glad that we I got to get my opinion out there, because, like, I feel like it's something that I've been wanting to talk about, but haven't really had the right avenue to talk about. And it's a complex issue, and a lot of these are complex issues. So I hope I did a good job of presenting both sides of the arguments in these cases. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I will see you in the next one. Thanks so much.